Every day, billions of gallons of fresh water vanish into Afghanistan's desert sands. At first, it sounds like madness, a nation pouring its lifeline into dust. But this isn't waste, it's strategy. A massive canal carving through the desert is set to reshape Central Asia's future, feeding new farms, fueling new power, and possibly igniting the region's next great water conflict. But before we talk about Afghanistan's new canal, you have to understand why this river already has the region on edge. By the middle of this century, Central Asia's two great rivers, the Amu Darya and Sir Darya, may carry 15% less water than today. That's the forecast from the Eurasian Development Bank, and it's already causing alarm across the region. Because here, water doesn't just sustain life, it powers economies, feeds millions, and decides political stability. For centuries, the Amu Darya has been Central Asia's lifeline. Rising in the high mountains of Tajikistan and Afghanistan, it flows over 1,400 miles before vanishing into what's left of the Aral Sea. Along its route, it gives life to the farmlands of Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, two nations that depend on it for almost everything. In both, agriculture consumes around 90% of available water, and without irrigation, most of the land would turn to desert. But the problem is, the desert is already winning. Years of drought, rising temperatures, and wasteful irrigation have drained the region's reserves. Satellite images show the sea has lost over 90% of its surface area since the 1960s, one of the worst ecological disasters of modern times. Experts call it baseline water stress, when demand exceeds supply so badly that shortages become permanent. The World Resources Institute now lists Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan among the 17 countries on Earth facing extremely high levels of this stress. By 2030, Uzbekistan could face a deficit of 1.8 trillion gallons of water each year. By 2050, that shortfall might double. For rural families, the numbers aren't abstract. Every drop decides whether their fields stay green or turn to dust. Millions depend on irrigation channels built in Soviet times, canals that leak, clog, and waste enormous amounts of water. Modernization projects are slow, expensive, and often politically charged. Farmers in Uzbekistan's Karakalpakstan region say their irrigation pumps run dry by midsummer. "We can see the river, but we can't reach it," one farmer told reporters. As the rivers thin and temperatures rise, water is turning into a political weapon. Downstream nations like Uzbekistan fear their upstream neighbors will close the taps. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have already clashed along shared water routes. More than 150 border conflicts in the past decade have started over access to rivers or canals. So when Afghanistan, the country that sits at the headwaters of the Amu Darya, announced it would start keeping more of the river for itself, the reaction was instant. For Tashkent and Ashgabat, that sounded like a threat. For Kabul, it was a declaration of independence. Because in a region where every gallon counts, whoever controls the river controls the future. And soon, Afghanistan would begin pouring billions of gallons of unsalted water into the desert daily. Not as waste, but as a strategy. In March 2022, in the flat, dust-colored plains of northern Afghanistan, bulldozers began carving a new scar into the earth. It wasn't a road or a pipeline. It was a canal, one that the Taliban leadership called the Kosh Tepe Irrigation Project. At first glance, it looked like just another infrastructure scheme. But for Afghanistan's new rulers, it was much more than that. This canal wasn't about engineering. It was about power, about claiming control over the country's most valuable natural resource, water. The Amu Darya River, which flows along Afghanistan's northern border, has always been the region's great water artery. But for decades, Afghanistan barely touched it. War, neglect, and political isolation meant the river's potential was left untapped, while downstream countries, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, built their economies on it. The Taliban decided that era was over. At a ceremony marking the start of construction, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the Taliban's first deputy prime minister, called the project a national priority. His words were clear: "This canal will bring life to our land and independence to our people." And they meant it. The Kosh Tepe Canal was designed to divert part of the Amu Darya's flow inland, deep into Afghanistan's Balkh, Jawzjan, and Faryab provinces. The plan: transform 3 million acres of barren desert into farmland. The numbers were staggering. It would draw an estimated 2.6 trillion gallons of water each year, roughly equivalent to nearly half of Lake Mead's volume. And the cost? Around $684 million, financed entirely from Afghanistan's own funds. With no international loans or aid agencies and Western contractors, the Taliban relied on domestic companies and regional allies, funding the project largely by selling mining rights, particularly to Chinese firms eager for Afghanistan's copper and rare minerals. Construction moved fast, faster than almost anyone expected. Within the first 11 months, satellite imagery from Planet Labs showed over 100 miles of freshly dug canal bed. By early 2025, the second phase was already 80% complete. It looked less like a single project and more like a massive human beehive, moving dirt day and night. Local contractors from every northern province joined in. The Taliban even created a special military unit to protect the site, while Defense Minister Mohammad Yaqub promised full army support. The construction was divided into 3 phases, planned for completion by 2028. The first phase, the main channel, would bring water inland. The second would distribute it into branch canals, and the third would focus on irrigation infrastructure, connecting farms, reservoirs, and pumping stations. The goal wasn't just to dig a canal, it was to rewrite Afghanistan's future. For decades, farmers had begged for irrigation while droughts turned fields into sand. The Taliban presented Kosh Tepe as a turning point, a project that would feed the nation, create jobs, and end dependency on imported wheat and vegetables. And behind all of it was one unspoken message: Afghanistan would no longer be the downstream country in someone else's plan. The desert was being cut open, and for the first time, the water would stay on Afghan soil. But what looked like a miracle of progress for Kabul soon began to look like a nightmare for Tashkent and Ashgabat, because every gallon Afghanistan kept was one less flowing north, and the balance of the entire region was about to shift. After decades of war and dependency, Afghanistan's leadership found something stronger than weapons: water. The Kosh Tepe Canal was never meant to be just a trench in the desert. From the beginning, the Taliban framed it as the foundation of a new national identity, a declaration that Afghanistan would control its own fate by mastering its rivers. For much of modern history, Afghanistan used almost none of its water potential. Less than 5% of the Amu Darya's flow ever stayed inside the country. Old governments, weakened by foreign aid and internal conflict, avoided large-scale projects for fear of angering Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan downstream. That restraint is gone now. The Taliban have replaced caution with assertion, what they call water sovereignty. Their message is blunt: our rivers begin here. We decide where they flow. This isn't empty rhetoric. Across Afghanistan, new projects are emerging alongside Kosh Tepe, each one a piece of a much larger puzzle. Another project, the Dashti June hydroelectric complex, is being drafted to control the Panj River, tightening Kabul's grip on the region's northern waterways. Every one of these structures sends a signal: Afghanistan isn't waiting for permission anymore. For the Taliban, this is about more than farming. It's about survival and recognition. They rule a country still isolated from international institutions, under sanctions, and excluded from global water-sharing frameworks like the 1992 Interstate Commission for Water Coordination. That isolation turned into motivation. The leadership began describing water as a national weapon of development, a tool to rebuild a self-reliant economy without relying on foreign donors. For a government still struggling for international legitimacy, that mattered more than anything. It was visible evidence of competence, ownership, and independence. In Kabul's new political vocabulary, water equals power in every sense: economic, political, and symbolic. Economically, it promises to transform the countryside, creating jobs and food security. Politically, it binds local communities to the central government by giving them access to something tangible: irrigation. Strategically, it turns Afghanistan into a player that its neighbors can't ignore. That last part is crucial. The Taliban's policymakers openly speak of water leverage, the ability to negotiate trade, transit, or energy deals by controlling the flow of the Amu Darya and its tributaries. In their eyes, this is Afghanistan's chance to stop being a passive transit zone and become a regional stakeholder. To support this vision, new infrastructure is being mapped along the canal's route. Government documents outline plans for industrial and agricultural complexes, including the proposed Haraton Agro Complex, spanning nearly 860,000 acres, complete with roads, rail bridges, and logistics hubs. The canal, in their view, is not just about irrigation. It's the spine of a new economic corridor. Behind closed doors, Afghan officials describe water as our oil. It's a bold statement, especially in a region where rivers have historically united and divided nations alike. But this time, Afghanistan wants to define the rules. For the first time in living memory, the desert is being reshaped not by foreign armies, but by Afghan ambition. Every new dam, canal, and reservoir is a brick in the wall of sovereignty the Taliban are trying to build, not against invasion, but against dependence. In the past, empires fought to claim Afghanistan's mountains and minerals. Today, the new rulers believe their true power flows from their rivers. In the northern stretches of Afghanistan, the horizon used to be nothing but sand and silence. Now it hums with the sound of machinery and men. Every shovel of earth from the Kosh Tepe Canal promises something Afghanistan has been missing for generations: hope. For most Afghans, survival has always meant farming. Nearly 90% of the population works in agriculture or depends on it in some way. But with no steady water, that work has often meant little more than endurance. Droughts, dust storms, and crop failures have defined entire lifetimes. Fields that once produced wheat and barley became wasteland, and millions of families were pushed to the edge of hunger. The Taliban's ban on poppy cultivation in 2022 made things even harder. Poppy, though illegal in most of the world, had been Afghanistan's most reliable crop for decades. It needed little water, fetched high prices, and kept rural communities alive through the chaos of war. But when the new rulers outlawed it, they needed something to replace it, something that could feed both stomachs and economies. That's where the Kosh Tepe Canal came in. The plan was simple but ambitious: turn desert into farmland. For Afghan farmers, it sounds like a miracle. In the Balkh and Jauzian provinces, local laborers say the sight of running water in channels where there used to be dust feels almost surreal. Some have returned from years abroad to find work digging trenches or laying foundations for branch canals. They know that if the water flows, it means food, stability, and a reason to stay. Government estimates suggest the canal could create up to 200,000 jobs, not only for construction workers, but also for farmers, traders, and small-scale manufacturers. Entire villages are already forming around the canal's path. Tea stalls, machine repair shops, and supply depots have sprung up almost overnight. In a country where 1 in 3 young men under 24 is unemployed, that matters more than any speech. And it's not just jobs. Irrigation changes everything. Studies by the World Bank found that when old canals were repaired in Bamyan province, farmers' incomes doubled. With water, they could grow vegetables, fruits, and grains that once seemed impossible. Now, those same farmers dream of expanding, growing wheat, potatoes, or even saffron instead of surviving on poppy or barley. Afghan families have lived for decades on what they can grow, or not grow. The new canal could break that cycle. It could reduce dependence on imported wheat from Kazakhstan and Pakistan, save families from debt, and keep rural youth from fleeing to cities or across borders. But this is about more than economics. For a country scarred by conflict, the canal has become a symbol of dignity. Many Afghans see it as proof that their nation can build something lasting with its own hands. It's the first project in a long time that feels like it belongs to them. Not to an occupying army and a foreign donor, but to Afghanistan itself. When water begins to flow across that dry plain, it's more than irrigation, it's identity. Farmers call it the canal of life. Parents bring their children to watch the machines at work, as if witnessing the future being carved out of the earth. There's still skepticism about engineering, about corruption, about whether all that water will really reach its destination. But for now, optimism runs deeper than the canal itself. For once, Afghans are talking not about fleeing drought, but about planting again. And in a land where survival has always meant chasing what little water there was, that's a revolution. While Afghanistan celebrates its new canal as a triumph of independence, across the border, the mood couldn't be more different. In Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, the Kosh-Tepe Canal isn't seen as progress. It's seen as a threat. For both countries, the Amu Darya River is everything. It provides nearly 80% of the region's usable freshwater, feeding fields that sustain millions, and driving economies built on irrigation. But now, as Afghanistan begins to hold back water at its source, that balance is unraveling. Experts warn that once the canal is fully operational, it could divert up to 20% of the Amu Darya's flow. For Uzbekistan, that's a nightmare scenario. Nearly 40% of its population depends on agriculture, and the country's 4.5 million acres of arable land are kept alive only through massive irrigation. Cotton, the crop that once made Uzbekistan famous, drinks more water than almost any other plant. If even 15% of the river's flow disappears, Uzbek cotton exports could collapse, taking 17% of the country's GDP with them. The picture isn't better in Turkmenistan. Its entire agricultural system relies on the Amu Darya for roughly 90% of its total water supply. More than 1.25 million acres of land are irrigated with its water. Without it, the country's key crops, wheat, melons, and cotton, can't survive. This is not a problem, one Turkmen hydrologist told reporters. This is a catastrophe. In Turkmenistan's lowlands and Uzbekistan's Karakalpakstan region, the water table could rise, leading to salinization, the slow poisoning of farmland by salt. Once that happens, the soil hardens, the yields drop, and even rainwater becomes useless. For downstream nations, this isn't just an environmental issue, it's an existential one. Uzbekistan's President Shavkat Mirziyoyev has repeatedly raised the alarm, warning that the canal could radically change the water regime and balance of Central Asia. At a 2023 summit of the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, He pushed for the creation of a joint working group to study the canal's impact. So far, the Taliban hasn't agreed. That's because Afghanistan isn't part of any regional water-sharing agreement. The 1992 Agreement on Cooperation and Joint Management of Interstate Water Resources was signed after the fall of the Soviet Union by all 5 Central Asian republics. It created the Interstate Commission for Water Coordination, the body that manages water quotas. Afghanistan was never included. Now, by acting outside that system, it's thrown decades of regional coordination into question. The situation is even more fragile because climate change is already drying the rivers. Melting glaciers in the Pamir and Tian Shan mountains are speeding up evaporation. Scientists say the Amu Darya's volume has been dropping for years, long before Kosh Tepe. In some summers, its flow at the Uzbek border is already down 25% from historical averages. With the canal cutting even deeper, that number could double. The United Nations has warned that future water conflicts in Central Asia could start not from lack of diplomacy, but from lack of water. The region has seen it before. In 2021, violence broke out along the Kyrgyz-Tajik border after farmers fought over an irrigation channel. That clash left dozens dead. The fear now is that similar tension could spread downstream, only this time involving entire nations. Adding to the anxiety is Afghanistan's engineering approach. Reports of leaks and seepage along parts of the canal have already surfaced. Without concrete linings or reinforced banks, large portions of diverted water may simply vanish into the sand. That means the river could lose flow, but the canal still might not deliver the promised irrigation. A lose-lose situation for everyone involved. Diplomats in Tashkent and Ashgabat are trying to stay calm. They've started private talks with Taliban officials, but without a recognized Afghan government under international law, formal agreements are almost impossible. For now, there's no mechanism, legal or technical, to manage how much water Afghanistan can take. And so the two downstream nations watch nervously as the desert shifts. For Afghanistan, Kosh Tepe is a symbol of revival. For its neighbors, it's a reminder that in Central Asia, one country's lifeline can become another's drought. If nothing changes, the Amu Darya, once called the River of Gold, may soon turn into a river of conflict. And yet, while the Kosh Tepe Canal captures headlines, it's only one piece of a much bigger vision taking shape across Afghanistan. The country's new rulers are thinking beyond irrigation ditches and farmland. They're thinking about rebuilding an entire nation from the ground up. Afghanistan, after decades of destruction, is trying to reinvent itself as a hub of regional trade and energy. Geography has always been its greatest curse and its greatest gift. Landlocked, mountainous, yet sitting right between Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. The Taliban government believes that by exploiting this position, the country can finally move from isolation to integration. One of the boldest projects is the Trans-Afghan Railway, a corridor designed to connect Uzbekistan to Pakistan's seaports on the Arabian Sea. It's a plan that's been discussed for nearly a decade, but is now actually under construction. The route will stretch about 404 miles, cutting through northern and central Afghanistan. The cost, $4.6 billion, is massive for a country with little foreign aid. When finished, it could change trade across the entire region. Shipping cargo from Tashkent to Karachi today takes more than 35 days by truck. The new railway would cut that to just 4. The first phase alone could move 3 million tons of freight each year, 10 times what Afghan roads currently handle. Within 15 years, capacity could jump to 20 million tons. The Taliban see it as a strategic lifeline. A route that would finally give Afghanistan access to global markets and turn it from a barrier into a bridge. For Uzbekistan and Pakistan, it's a shortcut that bypasses traditional Russian and Iranian routes. For Kabul, it's leverage, proof that Afghanistan can no longer be ignored. Officials expect at least $400 million per year in fees once the gas starts flowing. That income could fund local development, while the pipeline's construction has already created thousands of temporary jobs in provinces that had none. Alongside gas, Afghanistan wants to move electricity. Another cross-border initiative, known as Casa 1000, aims to transmit 1,300 megawatts of surplus hydropower from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan down to Afghanistan and Pakistan. The project's estimated price tag stands at $1.2 billion. For Kabul, it's more than just access to electricity. It's participation in a regional grid, a seat at the table in Central Asia's energy network. When the Taliban took power in 2021, only 18% of the transmission towers for Casa 1000 inside Afghanistan were built, despite almost all the materials already being delivered. Now, after years of delay, they're pushing to finish the remaining 310 miles of power lines. If successful, Afghanistan could earn $65 million annually just by acting as a conduit for energy. And then there's the dream of Kabul New City, an $80 billion urban mega project conceived before the Taliban's takeover but recently revived. The plan envisions a modern capital extension northeast of today's Kabul, covering 279 square miles, roughly the size of New York City's 5 boroughs combined. It would include 600,000 homes for 3 million residents, parks, schools, hospitals, and renewable energy infrastructure. The first phase, known as Section B, is being built in partnership with Kawar Construction, a local firm. If the project succeeds, it could generate over 1 million jobs, turning Kabul from a congested, polluted sprawl into a model of sustainable urban planning. It's a breathtaking goal, and a risky one in a country still facing sanctions, poverty, and political uncertainty. Behind all these projects lies the same logic: connect, produce, and profit. The Taliban leadership wants to prove that Afghanistan can no longer be defined by war. Instead, they're trying to sell a new image: a nation of builders, not fighters, a country that trades in gas and grain, not opium and conflict. From railroads to power lines to entire cities, these ventures are attempts to reshape Afghanistan's place on the world map. Afghanistan's leaders say they're reshaping the future, but on the ground, the question is whether that future can actually hold. The Kosh-Tepe Canal, the railways, the power lines, the new city, they all tell the same story. A country trying to leap forward after decades of chaos. But behind the numbers and speeches lies a harsher truth. Afghanistan is trying to build a modern state with tools and systems that barely work. In reality, reports of leaks, erosion, and seepage have already surfaced. The risk is that billions of gallons could simply vanish beneath the desert, leaving both Afghanistan and its neighbors short. And then there's the question of maintenance. Modern irrigation networks demand constant management, sensors, pumps, and data systems. Afghanistan has almost none of that. Power shortages are routine. Fuel is scarce. Many of the engineers working on the canal learned their trade not from universities but from experience on road crews. Their dedication isn't in doubt, but the scale of what they're attempting is enormous. That same tension runs through every project. The Salang Pass Tunnel, the country's only reliable route between north and south, remains a disaster. It's just 1.6 miles long, yet still takes half an hour to cross because of collapsed asphalt, broken lights, and choking diesel fumes. Officially, it was renovated in 2023. In reality, drivers pay road fees for improvements they can't see. If the government struggles to fix a tunnel built in the 1960s, can it truly manage billion-dollar mega projects? Corruption and capacity are the quiet threats behind every announcement. Local contractors have been accused of pocketing fuel funds or over-reporting progress. Oversight is minimal. Independent audits don't exist. And because Afghanistan's government isn't formally recognized by most of the world, international institutions can't legally intervene or verify anything. There's also the environmental clock. The Amu Darya is shrinking fast. Glacial melt from the Pamirs may briefly boost flows, but once the ice is gone, the river will lose volume permanently. Even if Afghanistan captures more water now, there may simply be less to capture in the decades ahead. Politically, the canal has already redrawn alliances. Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan are quietly searching for ways to defend their water interests through new reservoirs, alternative canals, or even covert diplomacy. The Taliban, meanwhile, sees any foreign objection as interference. "We are not stealing water. We are using what is ours," one official said. That argument has logic and danger. Without negotiation, a river can become a border, and a border can become a fault line. Then there's the financial reality. Most of Afghanistan's income still comes from customs, mining leases, and informal trade. The Taliban say the Kosh-Tepe Canal and other projects will pay for themselves through agriculture, transit, and exports. But those returns will take decades. And only if everything works perfectly. If the infrastructure falters, the debt, even if internal, will remain, while the desert keeps expanding. Still, it's impossible to ignore the determination. Against all odds, Afghanistan is building, not destroying. Whether it's pride, necessity, or both, the country is trying to claw its way toward stability by reshaping the land itself. And so the world watches a paradox in motion. A nation pouring billions of gallons of unsalted water into the desert daily, hoping to turn dust into life, while risking draining the rivers that sustain its neighbors. If it succeeds, the Kosh-Tepe Canal will stand as the moment Afghanistan took control of its destiny. If it fails, it will be remembered as a monument to ambition, a river that vanished before it reached the sea. Either way, the water keeps flowing. The only question left is where. Thanks for watching. If you found this surprising, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts below. More mind-blowing stories coming soon. Don't miss what they're not telling you.